Welcome and good evening to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for April 2nd, 2019. Item number 1, if we could call the roll, please.
Councilmember Brennan.
Here.
Councilmember Lehman.
Here.
Mayor Mars.
Here.
Councilmember Whiting.
Here.
Councilmember Contreras.
Here.
Thank you so much. Item 3, let's stand for item 2, stand for the pledge. I
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, corrections? Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have a couple changes. First of all, 9C1, which is the presentation by the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District. We'd like to move that from 9C1 to make it item 6A, to make it earlier in our evening tonight. And on 4C1, we recognize that the fee change for the escrow isn't on the final copy. However, it is on the original, so we would just incorporate that. For some reason, that was left off. We would just incorporate that change for the escrow into that final copy. And if you need more information on that, Mr. Kursky can fill you in on it.
Okay, Councilor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Next item, consent business. Councilor Whiting?
I'd like to request we move 9B1 and 9B2 to consent.
Question for the city attorney. These two are resolutions calling for a public hearing and setting the date. Is that okay to move them to consent?
Yes.
Councilor Lehman?
I'll see Counselor Whiting's 2 and raise him 1. I'll remove 4A2, 4A3, and 4C1.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear, Counselor. What was that again?
4A2, 4A3, 4C1.
Thank you, sir.
4C1 so that we can get the, what did you just mention about that? The,
Change?
make sure the change is made.
Yes, sir.
Do I have to put another one on consent? No,
So, a couple modifications. Take a motion. Councilor Whiting?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
A second.
I have a motion and a second for the modified consent agenda. Before we vote, we would read the modified consent agenda into the public record. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. These are the consent agenda items for April 2nd of 2019. 4A1 approves the minutes from the March 19th, 2019 meeting. 4A4 approves the Sunday on-sale liquor license for Pablo's Mexican Restaurant located at 230 South Lewis Street. 4A5 approves the on-sale and Sunday on-sale liquor licenses for Willie McCoy's of Shakopee, LLC, located at 1710 Crossings Boulevard. 4B1 approves the Community Center Gym Project, which is Project PA TAC 19 TAC 07. 4D1 approves a 1-hour suspension of the noise ordinance from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. on the dates of July 18th through 20th, 2019, for the 2019 Twin Cities Summer Jam Concert at Canterbury Park. 4E1 authorizes the execution of a professional services agreement with SRF Consulting Group Incorporated for design services for the 2020 Barronshire Boulevard project, which is Project CIF TAC 19 TAC 004. 4E2 authorizes the execution of a professional services agreement with MKSK and BARD for design and construction services for the Ridge Creek Park and Prior Lake Outlet Channel Improvement Project, which is PR TAC 19 TAC 001. 4E3 rejects the bids of Rachel Contracting Incorporated and Curbmaster Incorporated for the regional stormwater facility at the Scott County Government Center, Project STS TAC 22 TAC 001. 4E4 approves the cleaning contract with Treasures Enterprises Incorporated in the amount of $33,125.19 for the annual park restroom cleaning services. 4E5 approves the execution of the intergovernmental donation agreement with the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community for the Memorial Park Bridge and Trail Project, which is PA TAC 19 TAC 09. 4E6 approves the hiring of 2 Public Works Department maintenance operators, streets and utilities, at Step 3 of the Public Works Union Pay Plan. 4B1 is a resolution calling for public hearings on TIF 18, and 9B2 is a resolution calling for a public hearing on TIF 19.
Thank you very much. I have a motion on the table and a second for a modified consent. The modified consent agenda has been read into the public record. There would be no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on any resident that would like to come forward and speak on an item not on the agenda tonight. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and welcome on an item not on the agenda. Seeing none, we would move forward to item number 6, which would be business that was removed from consent. I think we have 3 items. 4A2, Councilor Lehman, this is on our investment.
6A, we moved the Spring Lake Watershed District up first.
I thought we were going to do that after these consent items. I thought,
We made it 6A,
okay.
did we not?
6A, but I thought I would do 6 first.
Okay, so whatever you want to do.
Moving ahead then to the consent, which is 4A2, which is amend our fund balance policy. Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, I took it off. I did meet with the staff, and I think it's an item, at least from my perspective, that is worthy of at least a little bit of public discussion so that the general public in transparency knows exactly what we're doing instead of just sliding around through in consent. So a little presentation by our finance director would probably be a good thing.
Okay. Basically, I meant both of the items on the agenda tonight, the fund balance policy and the investment policy. The fund balance policy, both these policies are about a decade old and really need to be relooked at and just refreshed a little bit on that end of it. There hasn't been any outside regulatory changes that would require an update to our fund balance policy, but it's still a good thing to look at. We're looking at getting a rating done this summer with our bond issuance for Canterbury area, and having these policies updated and refreshed and in line with good standard practices throughout GFOA and State Auditor's Office and such is a good idea on that end of it. The only major changes to the fund balance policy are our current general fund policy is that we limit our general fund balance to 40 to 45% of expenditures. Well, it just says expenditures. It doesn't state whether it's 2018 expenditures. If we're looking at fiscal year 2018, we don't know if it's looking back a year or if we're looking forward a year. So we want to clarify that, and really what we want to make sure is that we're looking forward. We need to make sure that at the end of the year, we have enough funds in there to cover our expenditures till the next tax payment, which comes in late June. I'm also suggested to amend it to 35 to 50%, which is straight from the State Auditor's Office, their recommendation. Our policy is 40 to 45%, so this is just widening that gap a little bit, just making it a little bit more feasible to, every year we've had to do a transfer to make sure we get into that line. Here it's just widening that basis a little bit, so nothing particular that really makes it bad one way or another. It's just widening that fund balance policy gap a little bit. And it also looks at next year's expenditures, the following year's expenditures on that. And I did increase it to 50% as well, too. Just wanting to, we've had some good years on the permit side of things, wanting to make sure that we keep a good reserve in place in case the economy ever does start to slow down. We have funds in our fund balance to make sure that we have ample fund balance there to pay for future inspections that need to take place from what those permits were paid for and such. So that was a major change on the general fund. The other major changes on the enterprise funds, our current policy called for, I think it was 3 to 6 months of operations plus 100% of our accumulated depreciation, which really in our enterprise funds are really run like a business. And in these types of utilities, our stormwater and our storm drainage, those are long-term assets. And to have 100% of your accumulated depreciation in place really doesn't make, sense on that end of it, because you're not going to be replacing that infrastructure in 1 year. It's 50-year plus life cycles for a lot of that infrastructure, other than some of your equipment. But to have 100% of that accumulated depreciation on hand would mean about $15 million of cash for each fund individually, and there's not really a need to have that in place. So what we're recommending is a 10% of your accumulated depreciation, which would cover at least your annual capital outlay, if not a little bit more, plus 6 to 12 months of your operating cash flow pieces of that. So we do some enterprise fund analysis every year, some long-range forecasting that we do in the spring with our CIP, spring, summertime. Over the last couple of years, we've had those graphs where we've showed both the stormwater and the sanitary sewer. And if you recall, our sanitary sewer wasn't necessarily even meeting the operating expenditures, our revenues coming in on that end of it. So we've looked at that and adjusted our rates to make sure that we fall into the line. And that basis that we're using was this exact policy. We weren't using the old policy. We talked about making that change to the fund balance policy in place. So we've been using that same criteria. Now we're just making it official and saying, okay, this is what our fund balance policy is going to be for the enterprise funds. So that's about what I have for the fund balance policy side of things. So
Thank you. Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, a couple of questions. The policy as proposed is going to have the 6 to 12 months of operational expenses and the current year debt service requirements. So hypothetically, if we do I'll use Canterbury as an example. We're selling $6 million worth of bonds to pay for the infrastructure. A portion of that infrastructure is going to be sewers. And so a portion of them bonds are going to be a sewer debt. Will that then fall into the operational expense?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman, those bonds will not come out of the sewer or the stormwater. Those are going to be TIF bonds specifically, so they'll be paid for with TIF increment. They won't be shown in the stormwater or sewer fund specifically. But if we ever did issue debt for those funds, the current year's portion of that principal and interest payment we would want to include in our fund balance policy to make sure that we can make those principal and interest payments on a yearly basis. Right now, neither fund has any debt, but if they did at some point in time, we would want to make sure that our fund balance is sufficient to cover that, and we would plan for that accordingly.
Two more follow-ups. So with that being said, the amount that we see on our sewer bills, city sewer charge, goes into the operational and the CIP, right? So if we sell bonds for a sewer project and now we've got debt to repay that, and that's a operational expense, wouldn't that would drive up the cost of the fee, the sewer charge, to pay for that debt? And then when the debt is retired, that charge would go back down?
Theoretically, but not necessarily either. If we would we would have to make sure that we add in that cost for that debt service into our rates to make sure we're covering that principal and interest. But in that city charge that's on everybody's utility bill, we broke it out a couple of years ago to break out the city portion and the Met Council portion. Met Council is strictly pass-through. Those are all those operational dollars that we pay each month to Met Council. In that city portion, it covers the capital outlay, as you mentioned, and the operational piece, and any debt service. And so we look at those when we do our long-range forecasting and make sure that all three of those components are covered with that fee, both the kind of the flat fixed fee and that monthly variable fee on the city side. So
I think the question he was asking, though, if for that sewer fee, and if we bond, he said drive up that sewer fee, but I believe that the bond would be paid back by a TIF increment.
in that instance,
I'm talking about not in a TIF district, if it was a sewer improvement.
right, if we,
In general.
yeah, if we added a new lift
We had to
station
bond
or,
for.
right. Right, absolutely. So we'd look at that in aggregate. So we don't look at specifically just the operations, capital, or debt service. We look at it in aggregate to make sure that our rates are appropriate for all of those. And when you look at a debt service, when you issue a debt service, you would think that the rates would increase because it's going to be the current users that are going to take advantage of that infrastructure that's going in at that point in time. They're going to be the ones that are benefiting from that 50-year useful life of that infrastructure. So they should see a potential small increase on that, but
But the operational cost is spread out amongst everybody.
correct.
So everybody would see the increase, not getting a benefit from it.
Well, it's a citywide system, so everybody gets the benefit of reconstructed infrastructure or new infrastructure to the system as a whole.
Except for my road in front of my house. That I'm still paying for. But anyway, moving on.
You have more questions? I just want to make sure you put out a good narrative in an email on this, because I had some questions. We're still, for our investment policy, we're still maintaining the SLI, which is safety, liquidity, and yield in that order.
Absolutely.
And then my second question about the performance standards of the dollars.
Should we clear this one first before we get to that one?
All right, we can do that one first. Counselor Lehman, or Counselor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the amended fund balance policy.
A second?
I have a motion and a second to approve the amended fund balance policy, 4A2. Questions, Counselor Lehman?
Yeah, just, so changing this policy isn't necessarily going to drive rates up.
No, absolutely not. This is just a policy and a guideline that we want to make sure that our,
And then we did put in there somewhere where the enterprise fund dollars can only be used for that specific purpose, correct? I think I saw it in here somewhere.
was a week ago.
D, nope, that ain't it.
Councilmember Lehman, I have to look back at my notes in our discussion that we had on that. Thought I had made that change, and I don't recall where it was at. Or maybe, was it in the memo itself specifically?
That would be under restricted fund balance, wouldn't it?
And that's really the purpose of each fund. Each fund has its designated purpose. If it's an enterprise fund, it's designated for enterprise operations. If it's a capital project fund, the specific type of capital project fund is designated for those types of fund balance. And then the general fund is obviously used for our general operations within the general fund. So we wouldn't be using, we don't typically use funds from one fund to another unless there was a specific authorization or a transfer that's approved by council to move those funds. So any transfer that we do needs to come before council to make sure that that's approved on that end of it. So
Interfund loan.
if there was an interfund loan, or even if there's a transfer, like a couple weeks ago, we closed a debt fund. We closed that into another debt service fund specifically, so.
Well, a loan is different than you spending it for something different. A loan you're paying back.
Right.
So I'd be happy to support this if it was in there that the enterprise funds are to be used specifically for their purpose as they were collected for.
They're restricted funds.
Yeah, I think the good example, restricted fund of the bond that we paid off and then have a little residual money that we do, every time that comes up, there might be a little bit of residual money. All you're moving it is from that restricted bond category to another restricted bond category. Counselor?
Mr. Thompson, is this enterprise fund a restricted fund?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, from a financial standpoint, I guess you would say it is. It's, yes, it's not a lead, it's a financial question, I would say it is.
We don't have to specify that enterprise funds where you're collecting like for a garbage can cart or something, that you can't collect that money and use it for something else.
No, I mean, I think you could do that in the, by modifying the fund itself somehow. I mean, the resolution, if you establish a special fund for something, you can include it in the enabling act to say it's only can be used for some for a specific purpose. You have the authority to do that. But this policy is really dealing with the fund balances in every fund, whether it be they restricted or not, so.
But we're drastically changing an enterprise fund.
With respect to the fund balance issues, correct?
And the amount of revenue on hand.
That's correct.
Motion on the table and a second. Further discussion? Discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, a little bit of what we got into here in a minute. 4A3, which is amend our investment policy. And Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, there was a couple of things that when I sat down with staff that we took a look at, and I wanted to ask if them items were incorporated into this document. One of them was council review and oversight on a consistent basis. I think it was either quarterly or every half a year or something. One of them was some cleanup matters. On some sections, it said see section 5, and there was no section 5. See section 7, there was no section 7 in the last document. And when I was reading it, I was looking for him, and it wasn't here, so I went there to ask him where's section 5 and section 7, and it was a typo. So he clarified that aspect of it. And then the last one was there was a certain type of investment that we didn't see ourselves ever utilizing, so we're going to remove that out of the document. Have them items been addressed, Mr. Nelson?
They have, yep. We removed the repurchase agreements. The repos is the type of
They're
investment
out.
that
Can't invest in them.
you can legally from the state. It's a state authorized type of investment, but typically I've never seen those, and it's something that we don't need to get into. So eliminating that is perfectly fine.
And what was the length that you came up for coming back and having a review with council and some little
We do that on a
oversight?
quarterly basis on the investment stuff.
That is, where is that in here? What's it under? Reporting?
Yep. Under I,
Financial director should present to the city council
it didn't specify city council.
At least
so we added
quarterly,
that.
okay,
quarterly,
very good.
page 6, item I. All right, I had a couple questions. Obviously, we're still maintaining that SLI aspect. And then on the performance standard on page 6, item 2, so 80% will be the Bloomberg Barclays U.S. Treasury 1 to 5 year index, and then 20% would be the Bloomberg Barclays MBS conventional 15. So does that make our standard more short-term than medium-term from what we had?
It doesn't, Mr. Mayor, council members, actually, it doesn't change it. This is just a different performance standard. It just kind of substituted out the prior standard is no longer there or isn't available anymore. So we're not changing any of the kind of the average yield on anything, or the average maturity, I should say. It's all staying about the same. But we are, we're in about that 2-year, 2.25-year type of average duration time frame.
I
is
know
kind of
that,
what
but
we're-
your benchmark used to be, I don't know what the short term was, but I believe the longer term was 10 years. Now this is 15, then the weight changed. That's why I'm asking that question. But it seemed to me that this would be at or just slightly below the former formula for your performance benchmark standards.
It should be the same, because it was the Merrill Lynch mortgage 15-year index before with 20%, with 1 to 5 year the 1 to 5 year U.S. Treasury Index.
All right.
It should stay the same. It was just switching out that, the Bloomberg from the Merrill Lynch piece of that, so.
All right. Counselor Lehman?
And I think a lot of it hinges on how much you have in the 1 to 5 and how they're staggered, and the same with the staggering of the
Well,
long term.
we, as a benchmark, we use 80% of the one and then 20% of the other to kind of get a blended yield there.
Right, but you could have anywhere from 1 to 5 years. You could have a 2-year, 3-year, a 4-year, or a 5-year.
That 1 to 5 year index is a specific index
Okay, so-
that's already got in itself all those types of investments that are 1 to 5 year range, and that's what their index is. So we're benchmarking our investments to what that average yield within that benchmark is
Right,
itself.
but let's
So
say you have 70% of your 80% allocation in 4-year investments.
it's not necessarily like that. You take a blended piece of that those two benchmarks, you add them together and multiply them out by proportionally, they're 80% and 20%. So you get kind of a blended rate that says, okay, we're going to be at 2.4 years instead of the 1 to 5 year is, 2.1 years, and the 15-year mortgage-backed security is, average on those is about 5.5 years or something like that. So you're at about that 2.5, 2.25 type ranges where our benchmark for all of our investments, when you group them all together and look at the maturity of them, it will come out to be at right around that benchmark piece of it. So that's what we're shooting for. You look at it in aggregate. You don't look at each individual investment purchase.
Right, but can each individual investment purchased be different?
Absolutely. I have investments that are 10 years,
In
and
the
I have
length of-
investments that are
in length of
15
term.
days. So,
Length of term,
yeah.
kind of what I was saying, because you could theoretically have 70% of your 80% in 4-year or 2-year, or a combination of some are 1 year, some are 2 years, some are 4 year. And that's going to alter your overall combined
Right.
return.
Right. And really, we try to ladder everything out so we have things maturing basically every 2 weeks from now till 10 years from now. So it really confines to our cash flow needs on that end of it. So that's where that safety is first. Make sure that's a safe investment. Liquidity is second. That's where we have on the shorter term of the investment side of it. And then yield is the last one. If we wanted a better yield, we'd move that liquidity out down the time
A
frame.
little bit.
So.
All right. Other questions? Other questions? Take a motion. Counselor Lehman?
Motion to approve the amended investment policy.
Second?
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Contreras. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. 4C1, which was the amended current fees for electrical permits. Michael? Or actually, Counselor Lehman, did you have a question and then?
Mayor, I took it off consent because at the beginning of the meeting, the city administrator pointed out that something was missing with the escrow. And I wanted to make sure if we're going to pass this, that we pass it with the
Yep.
correct stuff in it.
Mayor and council, this is the change that was in the original under the erosion control section, City Code Chapter 54. Currently, it's $1,000. So for commercial projects, it would be $1,500 plus $1,000 an acre, because right now, it's $1,500 for a single-family home, and on some of these larger projects, we've had erosion control issues. So this is just increasing the escrow.
This correction's already been made.
Yes, sir.
Where is it in our packet information?
Mayor and council, it's not in your packet. I think the manager's point was when this gets published, we'll make sure this is in the package. It's in the original that was published,
But it's
to
not in
you.
this one.
Correct.
Okay, so.
All right. So there's the correct. Counselor Lehman?
The residential landscaping escrow, is that for new construction?
Mayor and council, that's currently in place for new homes. So this change we're making only applies to commercial, and it's only the area you see in red. So right now it's $1,000. We're changing it to $1,500 plus $1,000 an acre. So this is when our inspectors go out and they make sure that the erosion control materials are in place and that mud's not going out into the street. So again, this is purely an escrow that people get the money back at the end of the project. So it's not a fee, it's purely escrow.
Still confused because it says residential twice on the top, and he's telling me it's strictly commercial.
Well, residential is up above, then commercial, and then,
Mayor and council, this is a clip out of the original one that we published, just showing the area in red is the only thing that's changing. So residential landscape escrow exists today, it's right here. Commercial landscape escrow is here. The erosion control escrow is the only thing we're changing. So it's going from $1,000 to $1,500 plus $1,000 an acre. Everything else exists already today.
for a bigger hunk of land.
Yes, sir.
Yep. Other questions? Other questions? If not, thank you. Counselor Lehman?
Make a motion to amend current fees for electrical permits and fees associated with escrows for erosion control as shared tonight from the DIAS.
A second.
Second by Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving ahead then, we're going to move to 6A, which is our 9C1, which is a Prior Lake, Spring Lake Watershed District presentation. And welcome.
Thank you. My name is Diane Lynch. I'm the District Administrator of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District. And just give me a minute and I'll get the presentation moved over here so we can get going on it. There we go. Except for some reason I started at slide 2. There we go. Thank you again for having us here to represent the Watershed District. For the first time, we are meeting with all of our partners and talking about the things that we have done in 2018. And of course, all of our partners are different with different interests. And so what I sent to you, oops, what's going on here? What I sent to you back in February, thank you. Oh, the down button, thank you. Is a little different than what you're going to see tonight. I took some slides out so that was much more relevant to you. We are a small watershed district. We are only about 42 square miles. We started in 1980, so our 50th anniversary is coming up next year. We started by citizen petition, and citizens were concerned about issues related to flooding in the area. So ultimately, we put in the Prior Lake Outlet Channel, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But we have a lot of water in our district. We have 4 large lakes and a lot of wetlands. Most of our district is located in what we call the upper subwatershed. So a lot of it is in the more rural area. We're a unique watershed district in that we have both rural and urban landscapes in our district. So this goes, it's a map to show you where you fit in as far as our watershed district goes. So if you can see up on the top, there are 2 spots which are located within Shakopee. And so there's not a lot of area in our watershed district that you are in our district. Our levy this year is the same as it was last year, which is about $1.8 million. Primarily, it is for water quality purposes. The majority is for projects that are related to protecting water quality. We have a small percentage that's related to flood storage, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on. We get our funding, much like you do. We get it through tax levy. We also have grants that we write, and we have partnerships with our different partners on projects as well, as you do. This is a chart to show you how we get our levy. About 70% of our levy is coming from the city of Prior Lake. For Shakopee, it's about 2.21%, so it's a smaller amount. Not as small as Sand Creek Township, however. Now, watershed districts are formed to cross jurisdictional boundaries. So they're designed to go where the water flows. So that's why it's kind of an interesting combination of townships and cities. We're all within Scott County. Many of our colleagues have many different county jurisdictions that they have to go through. So we're fortunate that it's just one county. We also have the Shakopee, Metawakan, and Sioux community, as you do, in our district, and so they're a partner of ours. So how we get things done, we have 5 managers that are appointed by the county board. And I know that your city administrator has been actively involved in doing the interviews on those positions. And we have 2 managers sitting in the audience today. We have Fred Corrigan from Shakopee, and then we have Bruce Loney, who you know very well. He's our new member, and he's been really fun to work with, has lots of history and knowledge of the area. So we also have 6 staff that cover a variety of areas, as indicated there. We work very closely with the Scott SWCD as well as consultants. We have a Citizens Advisory Committee that's required by law. They were initially set up to help us with our first water resources management plan, and they've continued meeting every month on a variety of subjects and are counseling us on our new plan now. We have a technical advisory committee, which your staff has been involved in, on our water resources management plan, as well as the rules changes that we're making. And then we partner with a number of other entities. So our district activities, we have a number of programs and projects, and I'll just go through a few of those. The Farmer-Led Council is one of those rural area programs that I had mentioned to you. It is a partnership between the farmers in the area and the watershed district, and the goal is a mutual win-win so that their practices on the land not only protect their economic interests, but also protect water quality, and we're very proud of the group that we're working with on that. Monitoring and research, we do a fair amount of that. Our lakes, streams, precipitation monitoring, and then when we do projects, we see how effective our projects have been, much like you do, I know. We have a number of monitoring sites in our district. That's a map of showing that. Just the latest results in our monitoring season. Our season is June through September, and those of you who are familiar with Spring Lake, it's one of our metropolitan regional treasures, as well as Pryor and Upper and Lower Pryor. We did an alum treatment last year. So that is a situation where the water quality was getting worse. In 2013, we had our first alum treatment. It's putting a chemical in the water called aluminum sulfate. What it does is it grabs hold of the phosphorus and drags it to the bottom of the lake. That only lasts so long, and it was time to do another one because we were inching up towards reaching that statewide standard. So we did that, and it's now down to 41. It should stay there for a while. We hope that we will have about 3 to 5 years before we need to do that again. Upper Pryor is generally right at the cusp of problems with water quality. It is an impaired lake, but we have been able to do a lot of projects to keep it in check. Lower Pryor is one of our gems that is not impaired, and it's kind of ironic that Lower Pryor isn't because Upper Pryor dumps into Lower Pryor, but it only is the immediate bay that seems to be affected. But we are doing a lot of our projects to protect that water quality. And then Pike Lake, the east and west, those are two, that lake has been put on the impaired list, and the Watershed District will be working with the Pollution Control Agency in putting a total maximum daily load plan together to deal with the pollution in that lake. Conservation easements, we do similar to you, is when there is a project or a housing project, small or large, we work with the landowners and try to get easements around the wetlands. There are 2 in Scott County that we have, and one is Living Hope Church, and the other, I believe, is called the Willows Development. And so what we do is we monitor that, and we go and let our different constituents know if there's issues, and we're really proud of what we've been able to do. We've done a lot over the last several years on that. We do have a permit program. We have what they're called equivalency agreements with our partners. Because we don't have that much land area in Shakopee, we don't have an equivalency agreement with you. So that means if there is a project that needs to be permitted, it does need to come to the watershed district. We have been in the process of updating our rules. The last time we updated them was 2003, and they're confusing to developers who look on our website. They're also confusing to partners. So we've been working with your staff as well as other staff of our different jurisdictions in the district to update those rules. And primarily, here's the next one. We're working on the Rule D, which is stormwater management, and Rule E, which is erosion and sediment control. And what we're doing is working with the different entities, finding out what they're doing and trying to find a middle ground. We do feel that we need to have higher standards than what's required from MS4, but we also recognize the challenges of working with existing roads, which would be considered redevelopment if anything needs to be done to those. So at this point, we're hoping to get the rules revised by the end of the year. But what's been taking us, what's been taking us most of the time, however, is updating our water resources plan. And I know that you are in the process of updating your comprehensive plan as well as your surface water management plan, which we've had the opportunity to review. Same process that we are going through as what you've had to go through. We're about 2 months out before we'll have it available for everybody to look at, but we have had a technical advisory committee, again, which your staff has been on, to review the plan as it's moving forward. And so we're hoping that we'll meet that time frame. State agencies have to review it as they do yours, and by the time the year is up, we hope that we'll have a new plan for 2020. We do clean water cleanups in the different parks in the areas, and we'd love to work with you on park in your area. This is rake for the lake. People don't understand oftentimes that leaves are not good for the lake. They happen to be natural, but they break down and they create phosphorus. And phosphorus is food for algae, and that's why we get a lot of green lakes. We've got another one coming up on April 28th at Fish Point Park and Prior Lake. We also have a number of enthusiastic people that love to pull out buckthorn, which just stumps me. I mean, that's a really hard plant to get out, but people feel so accomplished once they succeed in getting that out of there. So we're going to be doing another cleanup, and then we do another one in the fall. We have an integrated pest management program for carp, and carp are not good for lakes. They're bottom feeders. They stir up the bottom of the lake and bring that phosphorus that's at the bottom up into the water column, and again, the algae will grab onto that. When you do an alum treatment, same thing happens. If you've got carp in there, they're going to disrupt the blanket that has formed and get the phosphorus up in the water column again. So when we're working with water quality issues in our district, we have to deal with a lot of different things with the carp. We have to put up barriers to prevent them from spawning. We need to track their movement so that when we do decide to do a seine to trap them, we know where they are. There's such a thing as Judas fish. Those are the fish that have tracking devices on them so we can see where they're congregating, and so that when we hire the fishermen to go get them, they know exactly where they're going to be. So we have had 2 really successful seines, one in spring in 2017, one in Upper Prior last year, and about 17 tons of carp came out of there. But we're also counting on bluegills. Bluegills are great because they eat carp eggs, but you got to have enough bluegills in the environment to be able to counterbalance all those carp. So we're working on that. Different projects, we've asked staff, and we'll do this again for 2020, that if you have any public infrastructure projects, street projects that you're working on, that you'd like some help from the Watershed District to do best management practices, we'd be happy to help with that. This year we have about $100,000 in our budget to help these different entities with their projects. You might be familiar with the ferric chloride facility that we have. It's at County Road 13 and 282. That is a plant that acts similarly to the alum. We have water that is being dosed with ferric chloride. And again, that grabs the phosphorus and it prevents a lot of the phosphorus pollution from going into Spring Lake. This is a project we've had ongoing for many years, and it's very successful. Prior Lake outlet structure, we've maybe been waiting to hear about this. There is a outlet channel that goes all the way from Prior Lake to the Minnesota River, and you are very familiar with that. During the 2014 flood, we had a lot of damage to that channel. We have a new structure that was installed in 1983. It is something that we can actually open and close a low flow gate. You might be aware that we let you folks know about 3 weeks ago that we're opening the low flow gate to let more water out. And that only helps when the water level is rather low, because when it gets high, because of the pressure, there's not a lot of water that's going to be leaving. So we're happy to say that Prior Lake is receding. It's going down very slowly. Because at this point, the amount of water coming in from Spring Lake and the amount of water going out of Prior Lake is about the same. So once the spring gets lower, then we'll see more water leaving Prior. The Prior Lake Outlet Channel is managed by cooperators, of which Shakopee is a cooperator, Prior Lake SMSC, as well as us. We put together an annual work plan that has the channel maintenance, all the administrative work that has to be done. And the cooperators just came up with a master plan last year, and your staff was very integral to coming up with that plan, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. The work plan and the budget, so we allocate expenses by segment. So you'll see there that Shakopee, we don't start including Shakopee as a contributor of water to the outlet channel until we get to segment 3. There's 8 segments, and that's basically, let me see, I have written that down. I believe it's right about Pike Lake, where we first start getting into the channel with Shakopee. And then it goes all the way to segment 8, which is from State Highway 101 to the Minnesota River. This just shows you a map of the location of the channel. We are inspecting it. Sometimes we're doing it once a day because there's lots of culverts where debris can get stuck. Sometimes we're doing it a few times a year. It just kind of depends on the location. And we rank the culverts by high, medium, and low priority. The master plan, that's what I had mentioned to you. Your staff was very integral in helping us with. The master plan was very important because we had some of our cooperators who said, I'm not sure that we should keep on managing the outlet channel and structure the way we have been since the 2006. Maybe we should be looking at something differently. And watershed districts have the authority to set up water management districts, public utility types of things, which you can set up, I know. And we can do a special project like for stormwater. So all of those things were put out on the table, and the cooperators said, let's talk about getting the channel where it's in a place that if we decide that we'd like to take it over as separate entities, it's in good shape. So that's what happened. The master plan is, as you can see, from 2019 to 2023. So at that end of that time, the cooperators will decide what they want to do. So right now the channel is at MS4 like you are as a city. And so something's going to have to be done with that designation, and there will have to be a determination of what the role is of the watershed district. But essentially, based upon the estimate, you can see how much we need to spend every year. That's in addition to what we spend annually. So, for instance, in 2019, we're going to be spending $165,000 on bank repair, bank inspection, and dealing with invasives in the channel. Plus the close to $50,000 that we spend on a yearly basis. So we'll keep on doing that, and so hopefully by 2023 we'll be in good shape. And I have to tell you, we don't know if there's been damage to the channel. We're able to get a couple of the segments done, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. Before the water got really high, we've got about 2/3 of the work yet to do this year and the damage. So one of the reasons why the numbers are not that big is because we were already covering the repair with the FEMA money that we got. So the FEMA money was paid for downed trees. It paid for a sediment delta, which you might be familiar with over by 21, County Road 21 and Pike Lake Road. There were culverts that blew out. It paid for that. So the last thing that we have is the bank erosion. We know that there's a lot of water coming in from the upper subwatershed, and we're trying to address that by having flood storage. You are familiar with the flood study that we did in 2016. One of the main things that it said you need to do is find ways to keep that water back, hold it back. And so we are in the process of doing that with Sutton Lake. We have landowners that have given permission to to do a construction that will actually allow us to hold the water, drop it down in the fall and open it in the spring so that there will be more chance to store that water. But we have to do a lot more of those kind of projects to keep the water in the upper subwatershed. Again, we talked about the alum treatment. I won't go into that. And then Fish Point Park is just an example of a Lower Prairie project where we've done things, I'm sure, like you do. Iron sand filters, we put prairie restoration, we restored a wetland and put a water control structure there. So, and the Sandpoint Beach project, very similar. So are there any questions?
Well, thank you very much. How does the Prior Lake, Spring Lake District work with the Lower Minnesota River District?
We have a liaison, a board liaison to the Lower Minnesota Watershed District. But, and then because it's a watershed district, I, as an administrator, see Linda Loomis quite a bit at different activities for our Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts. But other than that, we were involved in that One Watershed, One Plan process, where I saw that for Ridge Creek, there's about $100,000 that Lower Min is contributing to that project. And so we were all partners with Scott County on trying to figure out how that money was going to be allocated. But we don't really work in partnership with them on specific projects.
Like the Deans Lake Outlet Channel, that we get a lot of impact from your district, right? And
Right.
you hold it back and that, and I know there was some work on that ditch here by 101 here a year or so ago. From where we sit, I kind of worry, well, what if the DNR says you can't put any bad water in the Minnesota River, right? And then how are we all going to work together to either hold it back, infiltrate, or clean it up? And we're kind of the tail end of your watershed district, and that's kind of what I look at and going, what are we going to do long term?
Well, as a matter of fact, the DNR just came up with the term biota. So the channel is impaired for biota, which is biology, basically. It's critters. But they don't know how to address that, any of the lakes or streams in Minnesota. So we know that something is going to have to be put in place down the road. But if we have a new master plan and we have it, partners divvy up the channel, and then we work as a group on dealing with impairments, I think that's something that we can get done.
Councilor Lehman?
A couple of questions, Mayor. First one is the Prior Lake Outlet Channel, where the water comes out of Prior Lake into the channel. On your charts, was that the higher phosphorus, 59, I think it was? Upper Prior is 59. Excuse me.
Upper Prior Lake, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, there.
So that's what's coming down your channel, correct?
Yes, spring goes into upper and then upper goes into lower, yes.
Okay, so I guess I'm trying to get a feel for what's actually coming into Shakopee, and it's kind of references what the mayor is saying. We're trying to clean up our water, and I mean, since we're at the end of the line, we kind of get hit with cleaning up, well, your water too.
Sure, and we do have projects to clean up spring. We've got that ferrochloride plant. We just did that alum treatment. For Upper Prior, we have a number of other projects that we're doing. Lower Prior, even though it's unimpaired right now, we are trying to keep it that way. So we're trying to hit it right along. One of the biggest things, again, is that those carp. And we have a integrated pest management program that we have in place to try to do all these different things to get rid of them, essentially. You're never going to get rid of them totally. They're always going to be in there. But if we can keep the numbers down, we're going to be able to manage the phosphorus better.
Second question, Mayor, is the, you asked if there was any projects that jumped to mind, and one was we just closed a street for the flooding because the pipe underneath, was it Pike Lake or McKenna? One of the two. Pike Lake? The culvert underneath the road apparently is too small for the flow. So how does that go about? Is that us, you? Who's responsible for that?
So the cooperators agreement, which is called our MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, says that whoever owns the culvert is responsible for the maintenance of it. We do have a landowner that your city helped out just recently, over the last few days, because we had a lot of debris coming in from the high water. So in that case, we asked you folks to maintain it, even though it was technically up to the landowner to do that, but you did that because you're good citizens and, you're trying to help out with the channel.
Well, maintaining it, cleaning up debris so the water can flow is one thing, but if the structure is undersized, then what happens? And I don't know that it is, I'm just,
Well, and I'm not an engineer,
Me
but what
neither.
I've been told is if you start, that's a 7-mile channel. So if you start enlarging, you've got to enlarge all the way down. And so that, again, I think is something that the cooperators, when they're looking at this master plan, 5 years down the road, how do they want to deal with that? Because you're right, there are some areas that are undersized, but you can't just do one and be done. You got to do the whole line.
Oversize the whole thing.
right.
Yeah.
And then, again, from my perspective, or at least from sitting with the city, is the water that's coming at us from somebody else is creating this need for this larger flow that's coming toward us.
Right, and that's why we're trying to focus on storage in the upper watershed. And it's really tough because we have, farmers who make a living off the land. And so we're trying to identify people, so it's a win-win. You have some area that you can never farm because it's too wet. We want to talk to you and see if there's something we can do together.
Okay.
I've been watching this watershed for a long time, and what's the future? Where are we gonna be in 10 years? And that's where if the DNR starts saying that, every city has to be responsible for the quality of water going into the river, that's kind of where this surface water aspect comes from, and trying to hold it back, infiltrate. You talked about storage, where if you had a big rainfall and you can, rather than run it, you can hold it back. Are we making any progress on that?
On the storage, we are. We're working on the Sutton Lake project right now, and that will hold back a little bit. We need to find storage for about 3 feet of water, and it's going to be just a
That's a lot of water.
small percentage of a foot that we're going to start with Sutton Lake. Yes, so we've got to have a lot of these projects. So, but as you know, the upper watershed is going to be developing. We're going to have development plans up there. The county has identified locations for regional stormwater ponds already. And so we said that we'd work with them on those as well. So we would love to work before a project even gets written down on paper. We'd like to work with those folks to see if there's a way that we can work on holding some of that water back.
Very good.
Yeah.
Other questions? Other questions? If not, thank you so much for this presentation.
Thank
I know
you.
It was great. You can keep coming every year in front of us, because
Thank you. I
think it's
appreciate that.
important. Your work is important.
Well, and thank you and your staff for helping us do our work. We really appreciate it.
Okay? All right. Done with that, then we would move to recess for our Economic Development Authority meeting. Take a motion. Counselor Lehman?
Motion to recess to the Economic Development Authority meeting.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? We stand in recess to the ADA, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's call to order the April 2nd meeting of the Shakopee Economic Development Authority. Please make note of the roll. Item number 2, approval of the agenda. Member Lehman?
Make a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have an agenda. Consent business. Mr.
Mr.
Mars.
President, I'd offer up the consent agenda, which consists of the EDA minutes for March 5th, 2019.
We have a motion for the EDA minutes on consent. Is that a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we have the minutes passed. General business, item 4A. Mr. Kursky.
Good evening, Mr. President, board members. So the first item is a short-term use agreement for Enclave. This is the people doing the City Hall site. As you can see, the site is 100% covered. So this is actually the aerial view of the site. There's really nowhere to store materials on here. And we've been working with the city engineer. We'll likely have to close a good portion of Second Avenue during this construction for being able to crane materials so that we can keep homes open. So they've asked to enter into a short-term use agreement for this site. If some of you remember, this is an old gas station site that the EDA acquired and cleaned up. They would do a temporary chain link fence around this property and store materials that would then be brought over to the site during the construction period. This will keep us from having to close a lot of home streets, so they'll store the materials on this site as construction moves. They're planning to come before the DRC for building permit review in about a month, and then begin removal of some of the debris from the site probably in June sometime. And they'll work through the winter and be done with this site probably in April.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lehman?
Mr. Chair, how do they get the materials from that site to the building site?
My question.
Mr. President, board members, so probably through the alley and off one corner of this site, they'll have a truck that'll bring materials over. So they'll load it on this site and then truck it over and then crane it up onto the site as they go. So you've seen construction sites, they'll have probably a number of containers where they'll store materials so they don't get stolen. And as the project moves along, they'll have flooring, kitchen cabinets, toilets, things like that delivered to this site. And then as they need them, they'll truck them over to the site and crane them into the project.
Go ahead.
I'm thinking of all the semis delivering the materials to this site. And maybe we should have some kind of maybe this happens later on in the process at your internal meetings, but some kind of a mapping system for trucks that are coming in and where to go, where to turn, where to park, so that we're not blocking First Avenue and stuff like that.
So, Mr. President and board members, so Kennedy and Gravel will be drawing up the use agreement, and we will have a meeting with them on how circulation will work. They did look at a number of sites with the city engineer. So they looked at the lot the city owns across the tracks. The city engineer was concerned about trucks crossing the tracks on a regular basis because it is a busy rail line. And I think there was a general agreement that this site will work, but devil's in the details. And so as we get to an agreement that will include things like circulation and delivery times, et cetera, we will get that with the city attorney and get it done.
I'd like to follow up on that. I do have a concern of traveling back and forth with the bigger trucks along the alley. It's a very narrow alley, and you could understand some workers and trucks, pickup trucks maybe, but any kind of semi-traffic I'd be concerned with down there.
And Mr. President, board members, so what'll happen is, if I can go back, so they will likely close and come back for closure from probably here all the way to Holmes, and this is probably where 2 cranes will be. And so we'll work with the city engineer, but larger deliveries like beams and truckloads will come down this street through a gated entrance and get unloaded by a crane. This is really for some of the smaller materials and tool chests and things you see in a construction. There's really no place to put them on this site until the building gets vertical.
Lehman?
So would they be making a left and going across the tracks to Third, or would they be making a right and going back to 101?
Mr. President, board members, To be determined, but we'll have to see how many trucks are going to get and how the street gets blocked.
Any other questions?
And my question actually is, the end game on this site for storage, they'd have to reclaim it then when they're all done?
Mr. President, board members, when it's done, we expect it to go back to turf, so seed it, sod it, whatever they need to do to turn it back to the way it is today. We do have a longer-term use for that site, but we don't want it to be an eyesore when they leave.
I know this is not a perfect situation here, but at least it's a solution that, with staff's help on the traffic circulation, can work.
And Mr. President, board members, I think the beauty behind that site is trucks leaving, then we'll go back onto 101. So I think after they make their deliveries, they're out of going into any neighborhoods or any other areas. So I think city engineer had a good idea of keeping on this side of the tracks, and they'll have to work it out.
I think eventually we'll start bumping into the other construction on the other side of First Avenue, and I know that's a little more separated. It's actually closer to the storage site here than it would be downtown, but
So, Mr. President, board members, at some point, we might swap, and they may have to use this site as they get further along. They have a road they can actually close, so Levy Drive will be closed pretty much around that project, so they'll be able to deliver and store from that side, but they can't close the county road, so it'll be interesting as that project moves forward, how they crane materials onto that site. So stay tuned on that site.
bong boom. All right, any other questions on this item? Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer a motion to approve a short-term use agreement for the EDA for property owned for enclave construction.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. We'll move on to item 4B, approval of a purchase contract for 313 First Avenue West.
So, Mr. President, board members, if you remember, this is the River Bluff project by the Gone Companies. So this was their original concept. If you remember, there was some discussion when this came forward, what's going to happen to those other three houses, and couldn't they do a bigger project, et cetera. And I think the council, the EDA and the city council's position was, we're not going to force anyone to move. If people want to stay there, they can. Well, over the past 2 years, there's been some interest now, most recently, that everybody would like to move. So because of that, this site will be redesigned. I actually talked with the managing partner at Gone today. They're going to re-engage their architects to start relaying the site out, and you'll see later on the agenda, you already approved the public hearings. We'll be expanding this TIF district, hopefully to include these three sites, and they'll be back to you with a modification to their actual development agreement so that you'll see a new building with probably a new design. I think this is a better solution in the long run. This is an opportunity to eliminate that alley and do some other work on the site that they couldn't because the three houses were there. They are currently served through that alley on utilities. With these three houses going away, it'll allow those utilities to be removed, and all the utilities will be able to go in a common trench on Levy Drive. So it's a pretty big step forward. So the way it would work is the EDA would actually acquire this house. It's currently vacant. There's no tenants in it. The owner is storing a lot of his personal belongings in that barn that's in the back and in the second floor of the house. The other contracts that are purchased on your agenda, we would then transfer those contracts over to the developer, and they will actually fund the closing of those properties. The only EDA expense on the later items would be the one payment to the owner in the corner of $25,000. He actually wants to leave early but close later, which I think we're fine with. But Gone's committed to actually closing those two properties, so they will fund those two purchases. So this is the only one the EDA actually be funding the purchase of the property.
This is exciting news. You know, we talked about this at the other discussion, and when redevelopment takes hold, I think that's what you would like to see, you know, the bigger package, Mr. Lehman?
Mr. Chair, did I hear that right, that the developer is funding the purchase of two, it's just this one that they're not funding?
Mr. President and board members, that's correct. So the EDA is actually, we're going to close in April. because it's vacant and you've noticed it's red tagged. We would like to get it sealed up. The other two houses are currently occupied, so we will then assign those contracts over to the Gone Company, so they will purchase the corner and the house on the corner and the one behind it. So on this map, so the EDA will be purchasing this particular property here in April, and then in August, we will transfer those contracts over, and the Gone Company will purchase these two. And the EDA will pay the $25,000 in June to have this gentleman move out, but Gone will actually close on the purchase. So that'll be amended, so when we have the public hearing and change the redevelopment district, et cetera, we'll have a new development agreement that will spell all that out and how the money flows. So they'll be adding about $10 million in value through this change to the project, so it will change the actual TIF district.
Mr. Lehman?
Why isn't the developer buying the third property?
There are only 3 properties.
Right.
So the EDA today is purchasing the one house.
Right.
They're funding the other 2.
Why aren't they funding all 3 of them?
Because they are arranging their financing so they can fund the other 2, and also they're going to incur about another $500,000 in redesign for this project. So this needed to be a very quick close, and so the agreement with them is that the EDA would fund this, add it to our note, so you'll see a change in our note back to us at 4%, and then they will fund the other 2 houses in August.
Go ahead.
Going to pay for the demolition of the structures?
Mr. President, board members, the Gone Company is responsible for all demolitions, so they will be clearing the site. And if you remember, you'll see later on the council agenda, we are applying for assistance to help them remediate this site of some toxic chemicals that were found, but they're also responsible as part of the TIF agreement to remove all the trash and other stuff that's on this site. And in speaking with the developer today, as soon as hopefully this gets approved, we're going to get a right of entry onto the vacant house because they would like to drill in the backyard of that house to see if there's any other surprises. So there's no more garbage dumps. I assume there's not because these houses are occupied, but they also want to see what the depth of chemical contamination is and the depth of the bedrock there.
Mars?
Mr. President, Michael, we're increasing our investment on this, in this developmental area, and I understand the project will grow incrementally in size and value, but for the city's investment, and we're going to recapture that through the TIF then, and especially the expanded TIF actually when we have to amend the map and the district?
Mr. President and board members, so based on the current investment they had and the new investment, so it's about $10 million more, which is about $900,000 in additional tax increment. We'll take 300,000 of that 9, and they'll get 600,000 of that 9, or whatever the proportion is. But we will get our money back. Yes, sir.
Okay,
At 4%. So.
thank you.
Any other questions?
So the developer won't have to paint one of these houses? I know one
Let's
guy.
talk about paint.
Was it one of the? I know the owner wanted his house painted out of the. Okay.
Any other questions? All right, what's the wishes? Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer resolution number 2019-002 to enter into a purchase contract for the address at 313 First Avenue West.
I'll second.
A motion and a second on the floor. Any more discussion? Discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Passes 4-1. Item 4C, approval of a purchase contract for 116 Atwood Street North.
Mr. President, the board members, so this is approval of 116 Atwood Street North. So there may have been some typos. I apologize. The attorney who was working on this, we learned, was on her way out the door to go on vacation. So it's supposed to be, and I think I caught as many as I could, but there may be others. It's $175,000 for the actual purchase price and $25,000 in relocation. Again, this is an owner-occupied structure that is currently occupied, would close on August 30th, and would be funded by the developer.
Can you point to this property?
sir. This one back here, it's,
That one, right? I just want to make sure.
yep.
Looks like a 5.
It's
That's-
grayish blue. It's got a little garage, one-car garage on it. It's right on the alley.
On the screen, it says 115, I think. It should be 11.
It says 116 here, so that's all right.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
All right. Mr. Lehman.
Mr. President, if the developer is doing this, why is it before us?
Mr. President, board members, so typically, the EDA would do these contracts and then assign them to the developer because, to be blunt, if other people were buying them, the price would probably even be higher. And so we've worked for the past couple of months. We've sent them the contracts. They're ready to agree to the terms that are in them, but we assign them once the TIF agreement's amended and the developer's agreement will be amended. It will have that language in the agreement. And that hearing is set for end of May.
Mr. Mars.
Just for clarification then, at the time that the TIF district is amended, we would get a check from from the developer? The money for this house would not come out of the TIF, is that correct?
The money for this house, Mr. President, board members, would come out of the TIF, but their side of the ledger. So when you see the final TIF agreement, it'll have to be modified. So Springstead's doing that right now. They're notifying all the taxing districts, just like they did when we created the district, that we're modifying it. There'll be a modification report from LHB adding these 3 buildings into the redevelopment district. So there'll be a lot of things before you in May to approve, and one of them will be a modification to the contract for private development that you have with GON, saying they're responsible for paying for these 2 houses out of their TIF proceeds, which means they'll have to front the money up front, just like they do on all the.
Not out of the city side.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? All right, what are the
I
wishes?
do,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
President. I just want to make sure that, so if the expanded part of the development goes up by 10 million, you said there would be enough general TIF dollars,
Increment, correct.
increments to the one house at 313 out of our side comes out at 4%. And then on their side of the ledgers, 116 would come and
And
the
the
other
house,
one is-
and the house in the corner, correct. So I believe,
plenty of capacity in the TIF district.
Mr. President, board members, yes. So that's why, if they had built the project that you all had seen and approved, there would not be enough capacity because it's fixed at 2.1 or $2.2 million. You'll come back, there'll be a new district because they're making a much larger investment now that'll pay, and there'll be new capacity in that district, so we will be amending that district. And I believe, and help me, Darren, if I forgot, but I think their return by statute is 5%. We're capped at 4%.
And all these sellers were willing sellers.
Mr. President, board members, yes. So the one on the corner you'll notice has handwritten notes because literally I walked with that individual when I was walking my dogs the other day, and he said he would never sell. He wasn't interested in selling, and thanks for the city's interest in the property. And the next day I got a signed contract, so.
Okay.
In the contract for development with GON, they're expanded $10 million in investment in that process. That'll all be spelled out in that contract, correct?
Mr. President and board members, correct. So it'll be, in speaking with them today, I mean, they talk, since they're digging out the 19 feet of garbage, they said maybe we're now going to go 2 stories of parking because as they expand this project, they're going to need more
They
parking.
got a hole.
Yeah. And they've got a really big hole, which is much cheaper to put parking in than filling it with something else.
Mr. Lehman.
Mr. President, item 21 in the contract says that the city is the purchaser. So do we have to do another contract to actually sell it to the developer?
Mr. President and board members, no. So when we do the contract for private development, it will say in that contract that these 2 contracts have been assigned to the developer.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer resolution number E2019-001, authorizing the purchase of the property for a total of $200,000, which includes $175 for the property and $25,000 for relocation at 116 Atwood Street North.
A motion and a second. Any more discussion? Discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Passes 4-1. Item 4D.
So, Mr. President, board members, you'll see this is also on the council side. This is to increase our interfund loan to pay for the acquisition of that house that we need to close on April, pay them their $13,000 in relocation, and pay the $25,000 to the property owner on the corner so he can be out in June.
Any questions? Mr. Lehman.
Fund that the loan comes from?
Mr. President, commission members, it'll come out of the general fund. It'll come through the EDA, then over to the city's general fund. We'll cover it for now.
And I'll just cover this now. So, Mr. President, board members, we have, unless lightning strikes me now, we're going to be closing hopefully on a very large piece of property. So the EDA, which over the years has borrowed funds for the project that's in the West End and others, will be able to retire some of that money back into the various funds with the closing of that property. So they made their additional deposit yesterday, so they have a significant amount of money now in escrow.
And if the EDA has available funds to cover it, it'll come out of the EDA first, and we won't have to go to the city's general fund.
On this, Mr. President, this expanded interfund loan then at that would get paid back from the TIF, expanded TIF district, correct?
Mr. President and board members, that's correct.
Right. I got it.
At 4%.
At 4%.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Good. All right, any other questions for staff? Questions for staff? All right, what's the direction? Ms. Brennan.
I'll make a motion for the approval of resolution number E 2019-003 to amend resolution number E 2018-001 for advance of certain costs in connection with the tax increment financing district number 19.
Motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any more discussion? Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Matt passes 4-1. Item 4E.
Mr. President, board members, this, as you know, we've never really planned to be in the landlord business, but we have. And so the owners of this property have faced a lot of things, including a government shutdown, and so they have not been able to move forward. They do now have a building permit. They have everything lined up. They have submitted their paperwork to the bank, and I think they're ready to go. I know they have talked to some of you on this board about some other potential financial help. They're about $400,000 over their original budget because it's taken them some time. So we tried to come up with something that were creative. So we are actually had not planned on owning this property as long as we have. So it actually is generating a significant cash flow now. So what we're proposing for tonight is that they would get $12,000. Basically, it's their last 3 months' rent rebated out to them if they get out by August 30th. So there's basically a penalty. If they don't do that, they keep their original loan. I think it was $73,000, which was not city funds, but actually old federal funds that came through the state, if you remember, that they've asked us to give to a minority or woman-owned business. This happens to be a woman-owned business, so it qualified. But we're trying to give them an incentive to keep moving. Kelly Buska and our staff is kind of hurting this project on our end, excuse me, to get them out, and been working with their contractor and architects and engineers to get this project moving. But it's basically holding up the entire project because GON does not want to be doing blasting or rock removal right next to them when there's 50 dogs there during the day. But basically, we're giving them the money they're paying back in rent because we're completely covered right now. We put a new roof on the building that we really didn't want to. We did some other minor repairs to the building. We've paid the taxes, and now there's cash coming in from their rent. So this is basically, if they get out by August 30th, they get $12,000, which would be their June, July, and August rent.
Might help them along on their new project.
It's something, but
Any
not
questions of staff?
$400,000. but-
Mr. Mars?
So, yeah, we've had a couple discussions with one of the owners there on this. So now we're gonna get a hard date where they would have to move out, correct? So that we can get our $25 million apartment going?
Mr. President and board, correct. I mean, I think this date, if you remember, I think their lease ended last September, and they're on month to month right now.
Right.
And we don't want to go through another winter with them because the building is not in great shape, as we all knew going into it. And GON really wants to start before the winter because they want to get all that trash removed and they want to start blasting. So, and they want to demolish the rest of the buildings in the site. And they said, we don't want to have two contracts. We got to come back and demolish another building. We want to do it once. And so I've talked with them. GON's on board. Everyone, the owners are on board. We want to get this project moving. And I think it benefits us because there's a hole out in the West End where they're supposed to go that we want to get filled.
Any other questions of staff? Mr. Lehman?
Two questions, Mr. President. On section 1 of the back of page 2, loan amount. The loan shall be increased by $12,000 if the borrower vacates its current location no later than August. Okay, I get that part. But the loan shall be evidenced by the note payable by the borrower to the city. So
So, Mr. President and board members, if you remember, this is a forgivable 5-year loan. So if they stay in business, they meet the federal requirements, which I think was $12.20 an hour that the state required. And they increase their staff, I think it was 50%. So they've already certified to the bank that they're doubling their staff, so they'll be able to meet them. Their payroll will have to be audited by us. But if they don't meet that, the loan becomes due and payable. So it's a 5-year forgivable note that every year a fifth of it gets forgiven by the city.
then the second question.
Go ahead.
Second question was, what if they decide they want to stay for the next 3 months? Then,
Then they don't get the $12,000. I mean,
Okay.
it's pretty clear that that was the agreement. So my guess is they'll be giving this $12,000 to the contractor as an incentive to get them out.
I think all parties agree, Mr. President, the renter, the city and the EDA and with GON coming in, I think that's why it all has to have date certainty to it.
No, that's going to be critical, and we don't want to be kicking dogs out on the street, doing anything like that. But it's a win-win when they have their project put together and moving up on the west end. Mr. Kursky might have to get some more dogs to put in there. It'd be such a nice facility, so.
Aren't going to talk about that subject right now.
Any other questions for staff? What's the wishes of the board? Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer resolution number E2019-05, making the changes to the loan agreement for Doggy Doos originally dated April 17, 2018.
A motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, item 4F, approval of a purchase contract for 303 First Avenue West.
Mr. President, board members, this is the house on the corner that I can actually say I never thought I'd be standing here and telling you that we had an agreement on. So purchasing that house, giving him his relocation money so he can get out. This is a family house. I think it's third or fourth generation they've been on this site. It's interesting, this site, if you remember the Potts family we bought, I think they were fourth or fifth generation. We've had some long kind of time Shakopee people that have lived here that are moving on. So I think the Passes are happy in their new townhouse, and I think this gentleman will be happy where he's moving. So
No coat of paint.
No paint?
paint, no washing his house, correct, sir.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Saving money.
Any questions for staff? Mr. Lehman.
This is another one that we're buying, and then we're going to assign it over to the developer?
Mr. President and board members, that's correct. So we will not be closing on this. The developer will, and that will be reflected in their new contract for private development.
Then, Mr. President, to further on that then again, these funds will be repaid out of the developer side of the equation on the TIF.
Mr. President and board members, that's correct.
Any other questions? What are the wishes of the body? Mr. Mars.
Mr. President, I'll offer resolution E2019-004 approving the execution of a purchase agreement with respect to property located at 303 First Avenue West.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Passes 4-1.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, rest of the agenda, we have our EDA bill list. Was there any questions on the bill list? Other than that, item 6, Mr. Lehman.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to adjourn to Tuesday, May 7th at 7 PM.
Second?
Motion and second to adjourn to Tuesday, May 7th at 7 PM. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, we stand adjourned.
We'll reconvene the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for April 2nd, 2019. Welcome back, and we are at 9A1 Ice Arena Turf, and Jay Tobin will present. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. The topic at hand is the turf at the ice arena. So when I first came on board, we talked about where it was at operationally. I've spoken with several of you about what's going on with the turf. And in the write-up, what it didn't break down, it did break down. This is where we're at comparison 2018 to 2019. So when the turf was first put in last year, it was the shiny new thing. The associations got on board with it and they used it to a degree. But the reality is we still lost significant money on the turf because the cost, I'm going to flip back real quick here and I'll come back. The cost to convert the turf, the expense of that is $13,592 roughly. And that you see the breakdown of what that is. You'll see the staffing to put the turf out and put the ice back in is higher because it takes a lot of time to rebuild the ice. It takes less time to take the ice out and melt the ice than it does the laborious process of making good ice. And if you also saw in the comments, there's about 24 Hockey Youth Association presidents that believe that we have 2 of the best sheets in the state when they're in there. Right now, we're down to 1 sheet. And the other sheet, as turf, you'll see our hours dropped considerably from 2018 to 2019, which also meant our revenues on the turf dropped considerably. We have an opportunity here to recoup a significant portion of what we invested in that turf. The turf value, if you saw when I broke it down, the finance department depreciates roughly 10% annually. So currently, it being 2 years old, that means it depreciated about $16,000, which it puts it roughly valued about $65,000 just for the turf right now. And we have a bid available to us. We went out to some brokers to see what would the market sustain. So it's valued at $65,000, and the first couple bids that came in were actually not even close to what we would have to recover in order for that to be a reasonable avenue for us to approve. But then Becker came back right before I went on vacation a week ago, Thursday, and they came back with a $60,000 bid. That $60,000 bid would be our walkaway. We'd walk away with $60,000. The broker fees, the transportation, delivery, all those fees, Becker would cover those. So we would walk away with $60,000, which is roughly 91% current cost recovery, which is pretty incredible for us. Now, the next part of that story is what would we do if we got rid of the turf? We have right now a customer who wants to buy the ice for the same window of time next year for roughly $36,000.
How much?
$36,000. What they have booked for us tentatively is 216 hours, which at $170 an hour would be $36,720. We wouldn't incur the expense of conversion, and we would have 36, and that's just one customer. We've had to turn down so many customers because being recognized as having some of the best ice, they want to book with us. We're also looking at opportunities to expand our ice hours. We had an agreement, we thought, with Hockey Finder to expand into the adult hockey arena. Unfortunately, when we had to take the ice out and we were down to one sheet, we couldn't support their demand. And so they said, come back and talk to us again when you've got 2 sheets to support us. So we're going to be revisiting that in the fall once we've got both sheets in. And hopefully for the fall league, we'll expand our hours and have adult hockey in there in the evenings, which will generate additional revenue. So this one customer, almost $37,000 without having to incur that cost. What would we do with $60,000 if we sold the turf? My recommendation would be to fix a problem that we have. A problem that we have at the ice arena is when it was designed, the one conference room that we have there is located on the 2nd floor in the back. There's no restroom, and it's not easy for customers to find. So as a result, customers go, yes, I'd love to have my hockey birthday party there. And then when they come to look at it, they go, oh, but I don't want to have it there. And so we can't rent that space. Really, the only ones who use that space are the youth associations for their meetings. So a recommendation would be to take those proceeds and in the arena, in the lobby, at the end of the arena, we have a space that isn't utilized that much. If you come in when it's max filled, there's not really anyone in that space. This would be an opportunity for us to activate the space at a relatively low cost. And the reason I say relatively low cost is because we brought some architects and engineers in there to look at the space, what would be necessary. The beauty of it is if we were to place it, if you see in this space right here, by putting a new meeting room in this space, it can follow the beams. We don't have to move any electrical. We have minor adjustments to HVAC. We don't have to do any changes to the sprinkler system. Fire marshal's already looked at it. We don't have to change any lights. So the only thing we have to do is we put what's called a storefront in there, which is relatively low cost, with the good glass, and it will mirror what this looks like here. And now we have a really great location, high visibility, glass windows, where a kid can have their hockey birthday party. It already has the flooring in there so that they don't even have to take their skates off when they go in to get their slice of pizza.
Counselor Lehman?
What's the size of the proposed room?
It is 23 feet wide and 40 feet long. It could accommodate, I think the fire marshal said, 80 people. It was 81. Now that would be in like row seating, so if they had a large meeting, but I would suspect that most of our gatherings there would be smaller, like birthday party.
And you would turn this into rental space.
We could rent it. I don't know what the price point would be yet. We'd have to look at the market, but my guess would be low end $150 per hour. So if you're not aware, our birthday parties right now on the other side, on the community center, we're having on average 11 birthday parties every weekend. So this is a demand. The citizens have asked for this, but when they've come to look at the space that's available in the ice arena, they found it unacceptable.
Is there, Counselor Whiting?
So we have the meeting room upstairs. This is in the lower part, kind of back in where the garage space was?
No, this is, so if you come in, the one upstairs is up on the 2nd floor up here.
Yep.
This would be, if you come into the ice arena, this is right across from our primary space in Rink 2.
Okay, I see. I'm looking at it.
So the beauty of this too is it would tie in. There's a bathroom here that no one realizes is there. So they would actually have an ADA accessible bathroom inside this space, which is a big bonus. And then this space right here, if you're aware, right here, there's currently a trophy case. That trophy case would move to a better place in order to highlight that. We don't have to move the 2 large screen TVs that are here. So we have minimal stuff that needs to happen other than to put this storefront in here. In talking with 292 Architects, their initial assessment is the $60,000 could more than cover the cost of this conversion to create a revenue-generating space.
Glass doors open, I mean, you're gonna frame this in so it ends up being a private room, right?
Correct, Mr. Mayor. Now, it would look just like it. We'd be using the same vendor that has the glass windows and doors that are currently at the ends of the ice arena. So it would match what's already existing.
Where I enter would be glass, then I would be able to look into the ice arena from
So the
that
whole
room?
the whole wall here would be glass.
Okay.
Now, you would be able to, we'd have blinds that you could close if you needed privacy. And this one doesn't show it, but in talking with the architects, we'd actually have 2 doors, because then we could use it, for example, when we have hockey tournaments. This becomes a great location for tournament registration. You come in, complete your registration, and go out. Creates a real nice flow. Same for when we have other sorts of meetings there. It creates a real nice flow. There's already a door located right here, so there's no fire exit issues, and then this is the primary fire exit. So as I said, the fire marshal's already come and looked at it. He said that this would be easy.
Counselor Whiting?
No, from the looks of this project, I think we're talking about the sale of the turf. I would still like to see this go in front of the Park and Rec Board, let them adjust it, look at it, and I'm sure they'll like it too, but then they could bring it back. So we're keeping them, we don't want to jump over that group.
Councilmember Whiting, if I might, in January, we actually had the Parks Board meet at the ice arena, and we talked about this as an idea, and their feedback was very favorable. They recognized that where the current location is, some of them had not been there before, and then when they walked up, they're like, this is not a good location. So they discussed this actually standing right there in that space in the January meeting.
During our goal setting, we talked about trying to engage the boards a little more, and I just want to make sure that they have it on an official business and agenda and kind of go through
Understood.
the process better, in my opinion.
Cool.
Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, I'm actually okay with this proposal. The only thing that I would ask is that task your mind a little bit to figure out what we do with the turf users, even though they're dropping off. But if I combine all of the turf users together, even at the drop-off, where do we relocate that function in a different space?
If I may, Councilmember Lehman, they've actually kind of been already making those decisions on themselves, which is part of the reason our numbers have been dropping. As they look at the best locations available, the Lacrosse Association has been moving to the Savage Dome, and they found that to be the best venue, even though it's more expensive than our turf. The Soccer Association has been going to the Burnsville Soccer Facility. The baseball and softball teams have been going to the Field House. I talked with the school district about what the potential future would be of a dome, since they have two turf fields themselves that they built in the last couple years. Unfortunately, they didn't put the footings in to do a dome when they did that upgrade. And so I think it's cost prohibitive. I don't think a dome is in the future for the school district. And I don't think that parks would have an outdoor dome on our future either at this point.
Counselor Contreras?
Hey, Mr. Tobin.
Yes, ma'am.
To me, this, it was concerning when I saw it. And I know I've done some research and I've read what you wrote. To me, the question was, are we serving our children, as in keeping them here, or is the ice rink now going to become a business? And I put it on a balance, and I kind of looked at it, and looking at it, I couldn't, let go of the opportunity of getting $60,000 for the turf when the bids are coming at $20,000 and $30,000. Losing that one customer who's acquiring 216 hours at $36,000. I mean, that's big. And then again, melting the ice and putting in the turf and building the ice again, making the ice again, 13,592. I'm looking at it but the council's not making the decision that we're just going to take it off. Like you said, and we've looked, the associations are already doing it themselves. That's why our hours are dropping, and I understand that. But again, I was just making sure that it wasn't something that we were like pushing them or like we were just deciding. That it's all happening. It's all happening, and I see it. And my balance is, my balance is going on the idea that we should go ahead. We should go ahead, and there's no problem. And then again, I read, knowing that you spoke to the affected association presidents and that they expressed the support. So I'm good. I just wanted to make sure that I do speak out for kids and the parents who have to drive further away, further away. But again, it's not, the associations made those decisions themselves. It wasn't something that we're just because, or we just decided as a council to do. So what else did I see that was really good? Hearing that we have the best 2 sheets of ice in the state. So great. So go ahead. Thank you.
Counselor Whiting?
Now, we have some people that have booked the turf for the spring season, is that correct?
The season is actually kind of tailing down. We don't have very many bookings for April this year.
So no one's going to be pushed out of their
Oh, no,
hours.
the
Okay.
turf would go out regardless. The turf was scheduled to go out on April 26th, no matter whether there was a sale or not. So no one will be pushed out.
Other questions? Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, I think we've got such a big investment in the community center. It's subsidized heavily by the taxpayers, even the ones that don't use it. I think it's incumbent at least from my standpoint, that we do everything we can to get as much revenue as we can so we can minimize the impact on those that don't use it. Looking at these numbers, you're right, it's just not working. For whatever reason, it's just not working. It's not financially viable. And I think he got lucky to get 60 grand for the turf when bids were coming in low. And trying to add in extra revenue on top of renting out the ice. Hopefully you're successful,
Other questions? Comments?
That almost sounded like a motion there.
Well, Jay wanted to send it back to the park board. I don't have a problem with that, but.
No, I think this portion of it with the turf, I think, the building of the recreation room, they might want to have some input, and evidently they had, so.
I mean, if
Just one really quick.
Counselor Contreras?
I know it says that the client has agreed to the 60,000. Is it like set on stone already, ready to go?
I have it in writing from
Okay,
Becker.
Perfect. Okay. With that, can I make the motion? With that, I'd like to make the motion to approve the ice turf sale and plans for the proceeds.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. I guess, I've only owned this turf for a couple of years, and the idea to change out that ice and then have something during the the dog days of winter, to have our community have that field area. And high hopes. I know there was a ton of excitement last year for this as a benefit, but I agree that the numbers, it's unfortunate, and then that much competition that they're choosing other venues. An opportunity here to end that turf. And then, you're right, what do you do with that money? And if we can put that investment into something that we can rent out that there will be demand for, it still really doesn't fix that back room on the second floor.
We've got an idea for that, Mr. Mayor. We have an idea for that.
I'll look for that in the future, because I drive by there all the time and the light's on, and apparently we gotta have the light on for security reasons, and I've never seen anybody in it, and it's a design thing, I agree. But those are kind of my comments on on the turf concept of it. Counselor Brennan?
I like the idea, and I appreciate the fact that you're looking at creative and innovative ways to address issues, and if it's not being utilized to its maximum, then coming up with creative ideas to counter it. So I support what you're doing.
Thank you.
Another comment?
One more. So what's going to happen for the Easter egg hunt if we can't do it outside? We did it
Oh,
inside
no,
last year.
it will still happen inside if you can't do it outside. We're hopeful that this year we'll be able to do it outside. We just had a planning meeting about that today.
Okay, in the gym. All
And,
right.
and also, if I might put in a plug, the Easter egg hunt, egg drop at 11. If it is inside, at noon, we'll start setting up the NHL alumni event. Will be there. Fantastic event highlighting the city. And the turf will be utilized. We'll have a climbing wall. A lot of our service organizations are doing games there to include the CVB. It's going to be a really cool event for the city, highlighting how great our ice is, how great our citizens are.
Awesome.
Motion on the table and a second. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Moving ahead then to 9B3, interfund loan resolution. Michael, welcome back.
Mayor and council, this is the council requirement to match the EDA on the interfund loan for the $300,000 for taxing increment district number 19.
Councilor Whiting?
I'd make a motion to approve resolution number R2019-040 to amend resolution number R2018-011 for advance of certain costs in connections with the tax increment financing district number 19.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, and this is for calling of a public hearing. Councilor Lehman?
But no, we put that on consent.
Oh, no.
One and two were on
I apologize.
consent. So item 9B3, is that what we're on?
Yes,
And the motion you just made was,
Councilor Whiting?
All right, to approve it. 9B3 was the correct.
yeah,
R2018-011.
we're amending that one, so you're offering resolution R2019.
Read the whole line.
Oh, yeah, so, yeah,
Correct the
resolution
motion.
number 2019-040 to amend resolution 2018-011.
Very good.
Okay.
Thought I had it right the first time.
No, that,
Not the second time, third time for sure.
all right, and this is to expand we've kind of almost already seen this in the EDA, correct?
Right.
Here, that's
Further
correct.
questions? I have a motion. I get a second?
Councilmember Brennan.
Further discussion? Discussion?
I was.
Councilor Brennan? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-1. Thank you. 9B4, authorization for application of Met Council cleanup fund. Boy, this is great. Michael?
Mayor and council, so this and the next resolution for deeds, so if you remember, part of becoming the Met Council's livable communities is that you are eligible to apply for this fund. I might tell you this is a highly competitive fund that covers the Twin Cities and some of the outlying reaches of the Met Council, but at least we're trying the first time. So Terracon, who is Gone Companies Consultants, actually doing the grant. This is a required resolution by both DEED and the Met Council for you to pass, but they will actually be doing the grant work. But this is to pay for removal of the volatile organic compounds and other stuff that's on the Gone Company property.
This is great if we can apply for this grant and get it. Who do we know on that board? I'll call them.
Mayor and council, I mean, our senior planner, Joe Whiting, and I attended their pre-application conference. Again, this is highly competitive, but they said the cities that get them are the ones that keep applying. So we have other sites in the city and other grants from the Met Council we can apply for. I think once we get through this process, we'll learn a lot.
Counselor Lehman?
What's the dollar range that you can apply for?
0 to, I believe it's $500,000.
and then it works in conjunction with our next item.
Do we have a dollar that we're looking at, or?
Mayor and council, we do not. Again, Terracon will do based on their final analysis of what the cleanup costs are going to be.
All right.
Counselor Lehman?
I'll offer resolution R 219-042, authorizing submission of a grant to the Met Council for tax base revitalization account funding for the environmental cleanup of the Riverfront Bluff redevelopment site.
Counselor Whiting?
I'll second that, and just a comment, I would think that since it's on the edge of the Minnesota River, that would give it some more points, but I'm not the person issuing that grant, but.
Mayor and council, again, highly competitive. They take some months to score these because they get a lot of them. But again, we haven't applied for one of these, I believe, ever. And there are many other grants. They, I think, announced $7 or $8 million the other day, kind of in their portfolio. And I think this is our first step to get into that portfolio. There are other projects in town that are looking at other Met Council potential funding. This is a way to get a foot in the door.
And this is gonna be shovel-ready with a project on top of it, ready to go. I think when I read a year ago, in the spring, when they released the last round of these grants around the metro area, I'm going, we gotta get our hand in here and ask. And all of those had projects that if they could clean the site, that they had a project all set to go. And so that's great. And thank you, Counselor Lehman, for making the motion. I do have a motion and a second on the table. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Next item is actually almost the same thing through D9B5, authorization to submit for a deed cleanup grant. Michael?
Mayor and council, again, so the Met Council collects a certain percentage of their pool. The state takes their cleanup funds and pools with the Met Council. So they fund them together, but they're two separate funding sources, so deed requires a separate resolution.
But the application is actually mirrored,
It's,
right?
Mayor and council, yes, it's kind of a one application that goes to both agencies.
And this is, the state uses this to leverage with the Met Council, so. Okay, Counselor Contreras.
I'd like to approve the resolution number R2019-043 for application to deed for a cleanup grant for the Riverfront Bluff redevelopment area.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving ahead then, 10A, our city bill list for our review. And then, moving forward, we would move to 10B, our liaison administration report, and Counselor Brennan.
I have no report.
Thank you. Counselor Lehman.
Stuck last night, Shakopee Public Utilities. Let's see what I got on my notes here. Had a discussion about nitrates. The state window is 10 milligrams per liter. The only place we're even close to any kind of concern is downtown, the downtown area, and it's because the bedrock is really close to the surface. So any fertilizer that's put down seeps into the cracks into the bedrock and goes down to the aquifer.
Right to the water source.
Right.
Yeah.
How to address that? Well, the more you build and the more you blacktop, less green space, less to put fertilizer down, so less nitrates. Let's see, what else did we have on there? 2 power outages. One was, as we all saw, a car ran into a telephone pole, knocked it down. That was 1,082 customers, 52 minutes roughly. The other was a transformer, 2.5 hours. I had to replace the transformer completely. I I did ask, who pays for all the pole and stuff when a car hits it? I guess they bill it out back to the insurance company, so that's nice to know. The rest of us ain't paying for somebody running into a pole. Officers were elected. Terry Yost is the president. Vice president is Deb Amundson. Secretary, like our EDA, is Manager Crooks. And had a discussion about the water supply plan report. Apparently that went in October of 2017. It's required every certain period of time. They got, apparently the DNR and the Met Council have different timelines than what their Met Council cities, counties, comp plans are. Go figure, government, it's efficient. Let's see, what else did I have? That's all that I had.
On our Counselor Whiting?
When you're a liaison to the public utilities for a little longer, they'll catch you on calling them telephone poles and
Whatever.
Power poles?
it's the utility,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So they caught me on that many times, but.
Did they have a discussion? I know the city had, obviously cannot watch it live, but did they have a discussion about our letter that we sent them? And did they table their action?
They did have a conversation about some of the points, our comp plan and what the city's looking in these, I think there's 21 points. They did go over some of them points, but really what they're gonna do is they're gonna go and respond point by point, and their staff is gonna sit down with our staff, which is probably a good idea, and go over them points. I did today actually talk to the manager at Spuck about the emails being not available to the general public, and he adamantly denies that it's always been available. But there is 2 locations on the website. Apparently, I was never on Spuck, you were. There's one location where you can go to their website as a commissioner and click in and put a password in and get into non-public information, I guess, as a commissioner. And then there's another link spot for the general public to contact the commissioners.
Their website is a little antiquated and very difficult to find that very specific page for those commissioners, and you get this drop-down menu, but it's not, I think it's difficult to be a user on that site, but leave it
Well,
at that.
at my age, a lot of techno stuff is difficult to use.
Okay, is that it?
I'll just comment on that if I may, Mr. Mayor. It was not available earlier this morning. It is currently available. Go figure.
Thank you. Does that complete your,
Yes.
Steve?
Could I also add, if I may, to Councilmember Lehman's point about the power poles? So the city owns the power poles. When they're hit, we actually pay Spuck for the replacement for their work, and then the city pursues reimbursement through the insurance.
Good,
So I just wanted to make that point
good.
to add to that discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. On Mayor's report, on March 20th, I met with county officials here, just discussing the state of affairs. On March 21st, I attended the retirement party for Kathy Clear, the long-term director of the Scott County Historical Society. On March 29th, last Friday, I attended Mike Hollander's retirement party, and wow, we're losing a great employee, but long-term employee, but congratulations to him. A couple things coming up. I think it's important for my liaison to give what I've done, but also highlight some things. So the Shakopee, Minnewacan, and Sioux community is starting their free yard waste for Scott County residents April 7th on Sundays, 8 to 2. They will be closed on April 21st. Sundays only, but free to Scott County residents. On April 15th, our yard waste from Republic starts, the week of April 15th. April 4th through the 6th, there's some open house warehouse sales in town. 6 local businesses selling their items at some pretty good deals. Also, as our Director of Park and Recs mentioned, on Saturday, April 13th, our Easter egg hunt drop, 11 a.m. at the community center, followed in the afternoon by the NHL alumni game at 2:30 for a great cause for the Minnesota Parkinson Foundation. And last but not least, April 27th, time to clean it up, cleanup day at our Public Works, and that opens at 11:30. That is my report, Counselor Whiting.
I think those warehouse sales coincide with Junk Bonanza. That's always fun. I love that. But I also attended the retirement of Executive Director at the Scott County Historical Society, and Mike Hollander's retirement. We will miss him for sure. I also attended on the 25th a meeting of some of the homeowners around the organic recycling facility. And as you mentioned, that's a great opportunity to bring your leaves in for free for Scott County residents, but there is a lot of residents that have a lot of problem with the smell and the dust and some of the things that come up from the ORF out there. And I know it's land that's in trust and we don't have a lot of pull, but they are our neighbors, the Mdewakanton community. So I guess I have a few questions for staff. Do we still have the equipment to test the smell in the air?
Mr. Reynolds?
We do.
Okay, are we using that when there's complaints that come out?
I don't know if we continue to do the test or not. I'll have to ask Chief Tate about that.
And there was, some of the residents mentioned that when they do call to report it, the dispatch says we no longer take complaints on the smell. Do we know if that's a fact? or
I
not?
can't tell you what the dispatch does.
Okay, so I think-
That's Scott County.
I think that's something we need to discuss with Scott County, because we need to know when those complaints are coming in so we can keep a record of that.
Well, I do know that we have a record of the complaints, and I can certainly get that for you.
Okay.
I gave that to that group about a year ago, all the complaints that had been filed, and I still have that document, and we can update that, and I can get it to council.
I guess my concern is we have our intergovernmental working group, and in 2012, I think it was Stan from the Mdewakanton community was out here talking about them potentially moving that site, and I don't know where that went. I know they've expanded it since then with the wood chip operation out there, and that's a concern that they're expanding it, but there's still complaints in Shakopee, and I'm just thinking that we can work better as partners with the Mdewakanton community, at least to talk to them and see where they're going, and I'd like to see if we can
Well,
move
I know
staff in that direction.
when we talk with them, it is a point of subject. They are obviously fully aware of it. They are looking and exploring their options. Mainly, it's their organic aspect of it that is the odor situation, and they are, I can tell they are actively pursuing a solution, and they do move on their timeline, which is frustrating for us as a city and our residents, but I can assure you that it is an item of on their list and trying to move forward.
Can we
to a
keep it on
solution.
our list so that we continue to discuss it with them?
Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, if I recall, Jay, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency was meeting with the neighbors out there also, or they were making getting
It's actually
information.
the EPA, because the PCA has no.
Okay,
it's
Minnesota
federal, yeah.
EPA. Federal or?
Yeah.
It's federal. yeah.
Okay. And, I know that the Mdewakanton have tried really hard, at least the last time around with, I know they were looking at when they turn it, the temperatures, the mixing of various products, your organics and your leaves and woods and whatever else that they recycle out there, how they can mix things differently. So, I know they're making effort. It's just like Mayor says, the organics stink. And how do you deal with that? You can't say, gee, next week it's going to be 40 degrees out, perfect day for it, bring all your scraps. And then when you've got trucks coming on a set schedule, it's just,
No, I
And-
understand.
And I'll be honest with you, I feel bad for the residents that have the issue out there, but prior to that recycle place being there, I remember John O'Loughlin and Norm Schutrup putting down commonwear in them fields, and we're getting complaints then about that too.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean,
Yep,
Thanks. Is that it, Jay?
that's
Thank
all I
you.
have, thank you.
No report.
City Administrator.
Nothing from me, Mr. Mayor, just that I'm looking forward to actually sitting down with representatives from Spuck and discussing these issues that the city staff has had for some time now, and I'm delighted to see that we're moving forward and going to try to resolve those.
I thought your letter was good, and it was my understanding, and without watching it, that they want to respond to that, and they had tabled their plan. So I really take that at our meeting, and now this is, you know, some steps here where open dialogue and communication, and I think part of that, the letter that with Steve's comments on there, you know, the collaboration part of it is paramount, so we'll look forward to that. All right, Counselor Lehman, item number 11, other business?
let's see number, oh, I gotta turn the page over. There it is. No other business.
Thank you. Item 12? Counselor Lehman?
Motion to adjourn to Tuesday, April 9th, 7 PM.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye. 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 Those opposed? We stand adjourned at 9:12.
That was earlier than I expected.